at about 5:15 a.m. on October the 16th of 2022. The police in Struthers, Ohio, pulled over a vehicle that had been spotted driving erratically down Youngstown Poland Road, almost mounting the curb several times. The police report also detailed that one of the car's headlights was disabled at the time. After the traffic stop was initiated, the driver, 31-year-old Miranda Fairchild, began shouting at the officer as he approached. The policeman informed Fairchild of why she'd been stopped, but she continued yelling at him, eventually punching him in the chest through the open car window. Backup officers subsequently arrived at the scene, but as they attempted to take the unruly motorist into custody, she continued to resist. According to the police, Fairchild kicked one of the officers in the groin before she was finally restrained in the back of the patrol car. She was then driven to Mahoning County Jail, where she was booked on charges of felony assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and driving with a suspended or revoked license. Number 6. Michelle English and Lucretia Bruno. On November the 24th of 2021, Florida women Michelle English and Lucretia Bruno went on a bar-hopping excursion that ultimately resulted in the death of an innocent man. The two friends reportedly started drinking at Bruland's Bar and Billiards in Lakeland shortly after 4 p.m. From there, the pair drove separately to Lucky's Bar, where Bruno at one point drunkenly fell off her chair. She then stumbled out the door and, despite being exceedingly intoxicated, got back behind the wheel of her vehicle. At about 7:40 p.m., Bruno drove to a Wawa convenience store to purchase a sandwich, but the store clerk, who took note of her impaired state, tried taking away her car keys to prevent her from driving drunk. The woman snatched the keys before they could be confiscated, but then proceeded to leave them in the store's bathroom while she sat in her car. Another customer found them and gave them to the clerk, who subsequently contacted the police about Bruno. While the latter was obviously intoxicated when officers interacted with her, she wasn't in possession of her car keys, so they were unable to arrest her for DUI. Shortly thereafter, English arrived at the Wawa to pick up her friend. The police instructed her to drive Bruno home and told the clerk not to release her keys until the following day. Officers subsequently watched English drive away with Bruno in the passenger seat, at which point they left, believing the situation to be resolved. However, a short time later, English returned to the Wawa to retrieve Bruno's car keys. The clerk relinquished the keys, thinking she simply needed them to move her friend's car. Instead, English handed the keys back over to Bruno, who, despite her impaired state, got back into her vehicle and drove away. Less than 10 minutes later, Bruno was involved in a crash on Interstate 4. The 47-year-old sideswiped a truck that was pulled over to the shoulder, consequently killing a man from holiday. After the police caught up with her and finally took her into custody, her blood alcohol level was determined to be nearly 3 times the legal driving limit in Florida. Bruno was charged with DUI manslaughter, DUI, and 2 counts of DUI with property damage. English, meanwhile, was also arrested for openly flouting law enforcement's order not to allow her friend to drive until she sobered up. Number 5. Titus Lowe. In December of 2021, a Singaporean OnlyFans star was detained by police after an explicit video of him was found on his 12-year-old niece's phone. He was charged with breaking the country's obscenity laws, which outlawed the sale and production of adult films and other explicit materials. 22-year-old Titus Lowe had joined the site, famous for its adult content, back in April of that same year, and prior to his arrest, had amassed over 3,000, mostly male, paid subscribers. However, following his run-in with the law, Lowe was ordered by the authorities to remain off the explicit content creation platform. In October of 2022, it was reported that Lowe had been taken back into police custody for allegedly violating the order to stay off OnlyFans. He was charged with breaching a police order, as well as another count of transmitting obscene material, to which he pleaded guilty. Lowe admitted to making repeated attempts to regain access to his OnlyFans account because he felt obligated to continue providing content for his paying subscribers. The young man was consequently jailed for 3 weeks. Number 4. Danny Presti. In 2020, New York City man Danny Presti, the co-owner of Mac's Public House in Staten Island, got into a contentious feud with city officials over COVID-19 restrictions that precluded establishments such as his from resuming service. Early on December the 6th, NYPD officers were sent to Presti's bar to arrest him for serving customers in direct violation of city and state closure orders. Instead of complying with law enforcement, however, the man tried to simply leave the scene in his vehicle, but after doing so ran over an officer, then continued driving for about 100 yards while the policeman was still hanging on the hood. The 34-year-old pub owner eventually came to a stop, at which point he was arrested on charges that included third-degree assault, reckless driving, menacing, and resisting arrest. Leading up to the incident, Presti had been clashing with New York authorities over their attempts to shut his business down amid spiking COVID-19 rates. In the area where Mac's public house was located, a week before the man's violent encounter with law enforcement, his tavern had been the site of protests after he was arrested for violating coronavirus restrictions and obstructing governmental administration. With the bar's owner in custody, officials ordered that it remain closed to the public and even stationed officers outside to make sure the front door was locked. The establishment persisted in its defiance of the law, however, allegedly directing patrons to a building next door through which they were able to access the bar, leading to the events that culminated in Presti's second arrest. Number 3. Tana Dahl. In April of 2021, reports surfaced regarding a contentious traffic stop that turned violent one night on the streets of Missoula, Montana. According to court documents, local police officers observed a pickup truck driving erratically around the parking lot next to the Missoula Fire Science Lab. An officer present at the scene that night reported seeing the vehicle repeatedly traveling in circles at a high rate of speed. Law enforcement subsequently tried to initiate the traffic stop at about 2:30 a.m., but the motorist initially refused to comply. The truck then failed to yield the right-of-way and continued to swerve in and out of the painted lanes before finally slowing to a stop. Officers were then able to make contact with the driver, who was identified as 33-year-old Tana Dahl. The latter reportedly exhibited obvious signs of intoxication, prompting the police to investigate the possibility that she'd been driving under the influence. While searching Dahl's vehicle, officers came upon 3 open beer bottles in the passenger seat and center floorboard. Following this discovery, the police told the woman she was being placed under arrest, at which point she became uncooperative. She resisted the officers as they attempted to handcuff her and wasn't successfully put into the back of the squad car until the arrival of backup officers to assist. Even after she'd been taken into custody, Dahl continued to resist, and at one point she allegedly kicked at law enforcement and struck an officer several times. She then lunged forward in an attempt to escape, to which the police responded by laying her down backwards in the vehicle. Dahl's defiance wasn't done, however, as she subsequently kicked an officer in the groin before finally being restrained sufficiently. She was taken to St. Patrick's Hospital for an evaluation. Her criminal charges stemming from the incident included felony assault on a peace officer and driving under the influence. Number 2. Michael Heath Buchanan. In the afternoon of February the 7th of 2019, Florida police were called to a home on Fieldbrook Way in the village of Fernandina, where a man was found to be in violation of a protection order. The suspect, identified as 60-year-old Michael Heath Buchanan, had previously been arrested for a New Year's Eve attack on his wife, which landed her in the hospital. The woman had reportedly been talking on the phone with a friend from out of state when Buchanan suddenly became aggravated and aggressively grabbed her by the neck. She fled to the back patio, where she called the police. She was then taken to the village's regional hospital for a swollen neck. In court, Buchanan was given a permanent injunction prohibiting him from entering his and his wife's house or from making any form of contact with her. On February the 7th, the woman found her husband sleeping between a grill and sliding glass door at the home and subsequently called the police on him. He was taken back into custody for violating the court order and booked at the Sumter County Detention Center without bond. Just before we move on to number 1, and in case you missed part 1 last month, we had that line up right after. Number 1. Chris Pritchard. A woman from eastern Iowa was gunned down at her dog daycare business on the morning of October the 8th. of 2022. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office was notified of the situation shortly before 8 a.m. when a 911 caller reported the shooting. Officers were subsequently dispatched to the Mississippi Ridge Kennels, located on Highway 52 in Bellevue, where they found 55-year-old Angela Pritchard dead from an apparent gunshot wound. Investigators immediately suspected the victim's estranged husband, Chris. Back in April of 2022, the couple were involved in a domestic violence incident that resulted in Chris facing criminal charges, as well as a protection order that banned him from contacting his wife. The man later violated the order by texting her, but he wasn't taken into custody until the early hours of October the 9th, the day after Angela's killing. Following his arrest, Chris allegedly admitted to confronting her at her place of work with a 20-gauge shotgun because he was upset about the no-contact order. He also confessed to fatally shooting her, then fleeing the scene. The 56-year-old man was charged with first-degree murder and first-degree robbery, both of which are categorized as felony offenses. On October the 31st, Chris pleaded not guilty during a preliminary hearing in Jackson County District Court. Later that month, the man's stepson, Joshua Close, filed a wrongful death suit against him, seeking compensation for damages related to the state and earnings from his mother upon her death. As of the most recent updates, a date for Chris's murder trial hadn't yet been scheduled. Number 8. Jakavius Smith. In December of 2021, Orlando rapper Jakavius Smith, who performed under the name Glock 9 or 9 Lock 9, was sentenced to more than 7 years in federal prison after being indicted on federal firearms charges. Earlier, in July, he pleaded guilty to possession of an unregistered firearm, using another person's identity, and committing a crime while on pretrial release. The penultimate charge followed an investigation which revealed that he'd used another name to fraudulently apply for and receive benefits through the Paycheck Protection Act. Smith, who went viral on TikTok with the song 223s, on which he was featured alongside YNW Melly, was also charged with attempted second-degree murder. In July of 2020, he'd opened fire on a house in Orlando, which was also occupied by a woman and her 3 children, reportedly targeting a rival rapper. No one was hurt, and the testimony of a witness who told the authorities Glock 9 wants to be Orlando's only rapper offered detectives some insight into Smith's murderous motivation. Number 7. Ishwani. Former high school cheerleader Karina Slusser moved to New York City from a small town in rural Pennsylvania in the summer of 2017. Less than 2 months since her arrival in the metropolis, Slusser disappeared without a trace from a motel in the Queensboro, where rooms were rented by the hour. It later emerged that the young woman, then aged 19, had been ensnared in a human trafficking ring, offering escort services. Her first handler had been 32-year-old procurer Giovanni Puguero, who allegedly sold Slusser to various buyers with whom she was expected to engage in intimate relations. They stopped working together after an incident in August of 2017, when the young woman reportedly caught Puguero stealing $300 from her purse. Upon confronting him about the theft, she was slammed against a wall and choked. Slusser was granted a temporary restraining order against Puguero before, in early September, she became involved with a new procurer. He was aspiring rapper Ishwani, a man in his early 20s who'd already been handling another woman when they met. He and Slusser exchanged roughly 800 messages from September the 10th to the 20th, and he'd posted an advertisement online offering a 2-girl special providing photos of Slusser and the other victim. According to court records, Wani and Slusser eventually fell out after one of the rapper's other trafficking victims had grown jealous of their relationship. Slusser was last seen on September the 20th of 2017 when Wani left her at the Haven Motel in Queens in a room paid for by another man. In spite of their previous altercation that had resulted in an assault charge, Slusser sought Puguero's help over social media, telling him that Wani had left her with no money and food. They made plans to meet up, but it's unclear if they ever did, and the teen was never heard from again. The pending assault charges against Puguero were dismissed after Slusser failed to show up for a court hearing, but he adamantly denied having been the last person with her. In November of 2019, in Manhattan Federal Court, Wani was sentenced to 15 years in prison for human trafficking after he'd been arrested by the NYPD following an undercover operation. He denied having passed Slusser off to another procurer and claimed that he had no idea what had become of her or whether she was still alive. Number 6. Cameron Williams. Rapper Cameron Williams, better known by his stage name as C-Blue, got into a scuffle with NYPD officers in the Bronx on January the 18th of 2022. As he was being searched by 27-year-old officer Cassim Pennant, Williams was reported to have accidentally discharged a firearm. After the two had become embroiled in a physical altercation, a single bullet struck and injured Pennant while Williams himself was hit in the groin. Both subsequently recovered, with the rapper then in his late teens being taken to a juvenile detention center after receiving treatment. As reported by a local media outlet, Pennant was subsequently released from the hospital to the cheers of his fellow officers. Just 9 days after he'd been arrested, Williams walked free after posting his $250,000 bail, using money from his record deal advance on his contract with Interscope Records. The union representing NYPD officers was enraged by the judge's decision to grant the young offender bail, particularly since he'd already been on probation for a 2020 gun possession at the time of the shooting. Among those critical of the outcome was also New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who claimed, "It is further proof that our current system is failing us." According to updates on the case from mid-March of 2022, Bronx Supreme Court Justice Naita Sema recommended Williams be tried in family court rather than adult court, as she believed the NYPD had searched the teenage rapper without providing a legitimate reason. Number 5. Heather Morgan. In 2022, multiple media outlets revealed that an aspiring social media influencer and rapper had been officially charged in connection to one of the largest cryptocurrency heists ever reported. 31-year-old Heather Morgan, who performed as Razzle Khan, would often rap about her purported CEO lifestyle in her videos, which amassed hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube alone. The self-dubbed Crocodile of Wall Street performed a brand of hip-hop that was meant to exaggerate and give a somewhat comedic twist to various topics, including social distancing, fashion, and her purported financial prowess. She explained the name of her online rap persona, Razzle Khan, as inspired by Genghis Khan, but with more pizzazz. The case against Morgan originated in 2016 when the cryptocurrency exchange Bitfinex was hacked, resulting in the theft of 119,754 Bitcoin. At the time, it was worth an estimated $71 million, but considering the massive growth that the cryptocurrency subsequently experienced, the theft came to be valued at $4.5 billion. The money was siphoned out in more than 2,000 unauthorized transactions that funneled it into digital wallets, dispersing funds between Morgan and her husband, fellow tech entrepreneur Ilya Dutch Lichtenstein. The authorities were able to trace the money, and in what the DOJ reported as its largest financial seizure ever, recovered 94,000 Bitcoin, estimated at $3.6 billion, from a wallet controlled by Lichtenstein. Over the period of 5 years, the rest of the 25,000 Bitcoin had been transferred out of the wallet through an intricate money laundering process and spent on NFTs, gold, hotels, gaming consoles, Uber rides, and Walmart vouchers, among other items and services. On February 8th of 2022, Morgan was arrested in Manhattan, and if found guilty, she and Lichtenstein face up to 20 years in prison on charges of conspiracy to commit money laundering. As of the latest reports on the matter, Netflix had initiated efforts towards getting the rights to Razzle Khan's story. Number 4. DeSean Robertson. In November of 2020, an aspiring rapper from Dallas, Texas, surrendered to the authorities after a warrant had been put out for his arrest in connection to the death of a young man. On October the 25th, DeSean Robertson, better known as Lil Loaded, shot 18-year-old Khalil Walker in the Woods neighborhood. Robertson, who'd gone viral a year prior with the gold-certified song Block Baby, was recording a music video at the time. He and Walker, a fellow rapper, were described as best friends, but the latter's sister reported hearing 2 gunshots ring out during filming. She ran outside of the house and found her brother lying on the street with a gunshot wound to his torso, as Robertson and another man were standing over his body. According to the police, a video of the shooting was found on the victim's phone. Robertson drove Walker to a nearby hospital where he was pronounced dead 2 hours later. The rapper fled in the immediate aftermath, but eventually surrendered to the police and maintained that the shooting, allegedly perpetrated with a rifle, had been an accident. In February of 2021, he was indicted on the lesser charge of manslaughter after it was found that malice hadn't been a factor in the shooting. On May the 31st of that same year, leading up to his scheduled court appearance, 20-year-old Robertson posted a heartfelt message to Instagram asking God for forgiveness. Hours later, the up-and-coming rapper was found dead by his mother after he'd suffered a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Number 3. Jamel Maurice Demons. Shortly after he was charged with double homicide in February of 2019, rapper Jamel Maurice Demons, better known as YNW Melly, enjoyed mainstream success and rose to the top of several charts with his song Murder on My Mind. He'd been charged alongside fellow rapper Cortland Henry for the murders of Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas Jr. All 4 men were part of the same YNW hip-hop collective, and the authorities reported that Demons and Henry had conspired to kill the other 2 men and stage it to look like they'd fallen victims to a drive-by shooting. The double murder occurred in October of 2018 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Demons turned himself in on February the 13th of 2019 and announced on Instagram that a lot of rumors and lies were being said regarding the double murder. He and Henry were also reported as suspects in the fatal 2017 shooting of off-duty Indian River County Sheriff's Department Deputy Gary Chambliss in Gifford. Regarding the first-degree murder charges stemming from the deaths of Williams and Thomas, who performed as YNW Sack Chaser and YNW Juvie, Demons pleaded not guilty and his trial date was scheduled for May the 23rd of 2022. The 22-year-old's lawyers were concerned that lyrics from Murder on My Mind, one of which read, "I'm a murderer, yes, yes," might be used against him in court. While rumors arose in the aftermath that the song was a confession to the double homicide, with the controversy adding to its mainstream draw, it had actually been released a year prior to the shooting. Number 2. Vontrelle Antonio Baines. 31-year-old rapper Nuke Bizzle, whose real name is Vontrelle Antonio Baines, was ordered to stand trial on December the 29th of 2020 in downtown Los Angeles after being charged with access device fraud, aggravated identity theft, and interstate transportation of stolen property. Through his music and social media accounts, Baines openly bragged about getting rich by fraudulently obtaining jobless benefits under the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. Baines exploited the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance provision of the Act, designed to expand access to unemployment benefits to self-employed workers, independent contractors, and others who would not otherwise be eligible. He uploaded a video to YouTube which has been viewed over 350,000 times entitled EDD, which is short for the Employment Development Department, the department that administered the benefits. In the shocking video, Baines basically gave up his entire illegal operation and while holding up several envelopes from the EDD rapped that he was getting rich by going to the bank with a stack of these, likely in reference to the debit cards that came in the mail from the department. Another man featured on the song further expanded on the delusional ingenuity of their money-making scheme by rapping, "You gotta sell cocaine, I just file a claim." Baines also bragged about defrauding the EDD on his Instagram. An investigation discovered at least 92 EDD debit cards preloaded with over $1.2 million in fraudulent obtained benefits mailed to addresses in Beverly Hills and Koreatown to which Baines had access. He and others involved in the operation had spent over $700,000 in cash from the cards. The rapper pleaded not guilty to the felony charges leveled against him, for which he faced a maximum sentence of 22 years in federal prison. Number 1. Quamaine Wilson. In September of 2012, rapper Young QC, whose real name is Quamaine Wilson, was at the funeral of his mother, Yolanda Holmes. Others in attendance remember that Wilson, an only child, seemed distant and unaffected by his mother's passing. 45-year-old Holmes, who owned the Nappy Head Salon in uptown Chicago, had been fatally stabbed and shot at her home in the 1000 block of West Montrose Avenue. While the incident, which occurred on September the 2nd, was initially investigated as a robbery gone wrong, it soon emerged that Wilson had hired a hitman to kill his mother. The reason, as reported by the authorities, had been financial gain and a desire for fame. As claimed by friends of the victim, Holmes would always financially help her son, spoiling him with expensive clothes and a Camaro, but he reportedly wanted more. Within a week of the woman's death, Wilson liquidated her bank accounts, which totaled over $90,000. And he was also the beneficiary of her 2 life insurance policies. The wannabe rapper used the money to fund and flaunt a lavish lifestyle across Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. His displays of wealth included him being in expensive cars, wearing designer clothing, or holding up massive stacks of cash. In one clip, he was seen giving back to his fans by launching $100 bills in the air to a frantic gathering. The authorities soon identified him as the mastermind of Holmes' murder, and he was arrested. Wilson was ultimately sentenced to 99 years in prison. just 1 year less than the sentence handed down to Eugene Spencer, the assassin he'd hired and whom he'd told in a phone conversation to make sure his mother was dead. Thanks for watching. If you were given a free pass to commit one non-violent crime without any repercussions, what would you do and why? Let us know in the comments section below.